Hey, beautiful tribe, Sheea here from Austin. And even though I'm your Tantra specialist, I also have many other talents and careers that I did before becoming a Tantrika, which, yes, I do have 17 years full-time experience, but I also have a lot of experience in other fields, largely being spiritual fields, health and wellness, which was my first main career, I guess. Certainly one of them, along with teaching career and, anything that has to do with, I guess, personal development. So I love sharing and empowering people and myself. I have a huge love of learning, which is why I'm here to share on many topics, because I do like to geek out in many ways on all things that have to do with the esoteric world and, the mystery school, spiritual stuff, Tantra, health and wellness, relationships, communication skills, you name it. So today I was inspired to share about a topic that is, I'm hearing in my circles, my spiritual circles, that, in this ascension process where our bodies are adjusting to the new energies coming in all the time through the eclipses and new moons and full moons, etc. Our bodies are changing over time slowly to be able to handle going from 3D to 5D. And that means that it's sort of like this lighter body that's not so, I guess, attached to the earth and heavy. And it was interesting to hear, because I listen to YouTubes throughout the day, my morning walks and my evening time especially. I'm listening to quite a handful of YouTubes every day for my education on different topics. And, it was really interesting to hear that eating meat kind of keeps us a little bit more attached to karma and this planet, as opposed to having a lighter body that allows us to ascend a little bit easier. So I guess in a sense, I guess you could say that those who are have plant based diets are a little bit more in alignment with the ascension process than meat eaters, because meat is the most dense piece of, the densest thing you can eat. Basically, it takes a lot more enzymes and a lot more energy for your body to break it down. And those of you who are A blood types or AB types really don't do that very well, which is why meat is not suggested for you as much. Now, granted, fish and poultry is easier than, say, beef and pork, so keep that in mind. So that's okay. But I'm just presenting these concepts in general because I take them in and I kind of assess them for myself and just keep it in my awareness so that I can adjust how I do things. And, I might tweak things a little differently knowing these things, and so you can too. So that means finding other forms of protein perhaps that would work better, which, like I said, fish is pretty easy to digest. It's a lot easier on the body, and you don't have to worry as much about fish being raised properly like we do need to consider when it comes to like beef and pork and poultry that are often raised on mass-produced factory type settings that are less than ideal and very low vibrational. So swimming in the ocean is a lot more high vibrational than growing up in a mass-produced situation. So that also is an important thing to note in your choices. And that's why if you do eat meat, ideally, obviously, it's best to get pasture raised from local farms if that exists. But, there are things like Butcher Box, that is known for, say, treating their animals well, and having it be a positive experience that's not so like almost like a dungeon setting that a lot of them grow up in and don't know anything else and aren't even in nature at all, and eating natural grass. They're they feed them corn and wheat and all these things to fatten them up. But at any rate, that's not what this video is about. Actually, it's like the question came, well, to the next concept, which is a lot of times, the plant-based and natural foods like fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds are kind of more conducive to the ascension process of evolving, I'm going to say, as we are right now, big time on our planet. And so that's sort of the direction you're going to want to lean, I guess, basically. But make sure you're getting enough protein too, because I've had the mistake of kind of losing a lot of my muscle because I wasn't getting enough protein in so I had to really actually be intentional about that. And they're saying that the next step of eating is kind of more along the lines of liquid. Sorry, the lighting isn't so good in here. It just is that way today for some reason, not as sunny. But in any rate, so I was like, oh, interesting, because I've definitely noticed myself naturally going towards liquids a lot and wanting just different kinds of liquids, and especially if they're sustaining to me, like a protein smoothie. So, I've adapted some techniques that I thought I'd share because they are very helpful in this process of, and if you're into like intermittent fasting or wanting to lose weight, liquids are a great way to go too, especially if they're loaded with nutrition. I myself personally really enjoy it. And I tend to make like a set of liquids as far as protein shakes. And the other one I was going to talk about is I make this vegetable collagen, like bone broth is another version, because both are very sustainable and that they're high in protein and nutrition, especially with all the stuff I add to them in the form of powders and, liquid tinctures, whatever, So I find that they end up being very sustaining when I'm kind of more in a fasting state or wanting to, like replace a meal with one of those, especially in the mornings. That's always how I start off, because it's wise to get protein in the body in the morning in general, unless you're an A type or AB blood type, where you're not so protein focused or dependent like the other ones. O types, you are very protein dependent, and so you need to get a lot of protein in. And it's good to start that way so that you get some sustainable food into your system. And it also is important when you're breaking your fast that's overnight, or whenever you are breaking your intermittent fast or just your overnight fast, you need to eat. Your first thing that you eat is very key, and a lot of us forget this. So this was something I really have become aware of lately, is making sure that it's not a high fat meal or a high fat item. So for instance, you don't want to, and it's often reversed in our culture, of course, where, we're getting pushed in the mornings with bacon and eggs, and that is not the way to go. It's too high in fat, and if you're breaking a fast with a lot of fat, it's going to backfire and kind of sabotage you. So protein is good, but a lean protein. So that's where a protein smoothie comes in really handy. And then you can have the, other stuff later, but just not the first thing you eat when you're breaking that fast. So that's where I find that the bone broth and the protein shakes come in handy, or it might be just a lean form of protein that I'm eating. But you just want to make sure, there's not a lot of fat in that first meal, because that will kind of erase the effects you're trying to have. So anyway, I thought I would tell you about my little journey of how I prepare for those two things, bone broth that I make at home and the protein shakes that I make at home in a form of sets that kind of last me the whole week. So this is a good example of my protein shake. I recycle these bottles that I, might buy from something I'm wanting, but then I use the bottles later. And what's useful is that I have a bunch of these bottles all laid out on my counter, and then I use this, which is sort of like this handheld device that turns on, that I stick into the bottle, and it mixes it all up for me, so I'm not having to even do that extra step of doing it all in a blender and then pouring it into the bottles. I don't know, there's something about that. It's sort of like a hack or whatever, at least it is for me, where I at least know how much of each supplement or powder I'm putting into each bottle. And then I'm mixing it up with that by just sticking that inside the bottle, making sure it's not too full because it'll whirl it up and out of the bottle if you're not careful. But doing that, and then it's boom, it's like it's done. And I just put the caps on and they're good to go. I put them in the fridge and I just pull them out as I need them. So I'm using, protein powders that are more on the conscious side. I guess you could say I tend to use like pea protein, or it seems like that's a big one these days. And then I do add a bunch of stuff. Like I have different green powders that I can put in there, and anything that's kind of strange or weird that I need to put into my diet, like for instance, lecithin powder is something really good for B blood types, because that's what I am, and they suggest that especially in the morning. Flax seeds that I mix up in like the coffee grinder little appliances that we can have, I'll put the flax seeds in there and grind them up so that I'm getting the sort of like opens up the potential of the flax seed, so it doesn't just become like a fiber that goes straight through your system. So it breaks it down for you so it can absorb, and I'll maybe put some of that in there. What else do I put in? I have lots of different tinctures and liquids and powders of different types that I kind of like rotate in there. And then I also put like this liquid chai concentrate. I know that like Trader Joe's sells one of them, and I know at my farmer's market they have one, and I'll put that in there because it does need to taste good. And so that's kind of one way that I do that, I suppose, to make sure that it tastes good enough. Then the bone broth one is, believe it or not, chicken feet are one of the highest things you can get that creates collagen. So you can buy chicken feet at the store. You probably haven't noticed that, but they do have it. And you can just buy it like you do in a meat carton, and they look weird, but just ignore that. And so what you do is I'm using my pressure cooker and you add some apple cider vinegar in there, a couple tablespoons with all the chicken feet and water, and then that way all the collagen comes out into the water, and then I save that collagen in containers that I then pour into each protein shake bottle to be part of my protein shake. And the collagen's kind of tasteless. It's just sort of like a gel consistency, and I just add it in there. So that's one step. The next step is I find that it's hard for me to get enough vegetables into my diet on a daily basis. I just don't really eat that much. A lot of times I'm intermittent fasting, and I'm just, and probably not able to get as much nutrition into my system through food as I would like. And so the way I've dealt with that is I will take all the vegetables and put it in the pressure cooker. Make sure I'm not overcooking. That's one thing about the pressure cooker you do have to be aware of, is not to overdo it. So I'm often turning it off before it's even done, because I just want it to get the good stuff out, but not overdo it to where it kills a lot of the nutrition through too much heat. And I just use my intuition on that, I guess. But I throw all those veggies that I would normally, eat, but I just make sure that it gets into the broth of the pressure cooker. And then I use that broth is one of my choices that I have in the morning, say instead of coffee, or in addition to your coffee or whatever. It's just one of those hot drinks you can use. So using that vegetable broth as a baseline, you can add the collagen to that as well, which I do when I make a broth drink for myself. And then I'm also adding a lot of flavor as far as spices and herbs and stuff to flavor that broth even more. That I'm adding in that after, because you don't need to cook spices like that. It might as well come in fresh. And so I'm adding spices to the broth so it's tasting good, it's all loaded, and even a little bit of oil just to make it even more sustainable as far as like satiation, so that I'm not hungry to eat. What I mean by that is like MCT oil, like a tablespoon or teaspoon of that into each bottle. Little bit of olive oil in the same way, not too much, but it does make it so that it sustains you, so you're not as hungry, right? And keto people know this. So that mixed in with that collagen, and then I'm getting all the nutrition from the vegetables into this broth form. So anyway, those are two really good examples of liquids that I go out of my way to prepare, so that I have it's basically like a meal in a bottle, that's loaded with nutrition, because it has collagen in it. It has the vegetable, all the goodness from the vegetables cooked into the broth. And then, I can add anything I want. Like I said, the oils, the spices, amino acid, like liquid aminos is another thing. I'll add a little bit of miso paste in there, because then it's like good for your microbiome and your gut. And so I have found those to be like two staples that I use on a liquid way if I'm kind of wanting to go more toward a liquid diet, or if I'm doing intermittent fasting, or I'm needing to sustain myself while I'm running around doing errands and I'm too busy to eat, maybe because I have back-to-back clients or whatever the choice may be. It is kind of handy to have that. Now I make the bone broth extra thick and kind of like a concentrate, because then I'll fill my bottle up like a little more than halfway, and then I add the hot water in when I'm ready to drink it, so that it's a hot beverage. And that's how I deal with that piece of the puzzle. I'm not heating it up again in order to drink it. I'm just adding hot water from the kettle to the mixture, because it's already really concentrated, so it comes out just right when I'm ready to drink it. So anyway, I hope that's helpful for those of you who kind of want to use some hacks around. It's great for weight loss. It's great for getting, protein in your body and nutrition in a way that's liquid. And since they do say we are going to be moving more in that direction to go into 5D, and in our evolution process, it makes you less apparently tied to the earth and kind of tied to karma. I guess eating animals kind of makes you more tied to karma, which kind of makes sense in a way. But at any rate, these are esoteric principles, and take it or leave it. But I just wanted to share that because I did figure that out on my own, how to kind of put those pieces together and make it work for me, and thought it would be useful and maybe inspire some of you to be able to move in that direction as well.